"Get out! You don't belong here." Those words cut through the microphone, echoing over the ocean breeze and straight into my chest. My daughter-in-law's flawless smile never faltered as 200 guests and thousands online watched me shrink in shame. I had given her $30,000 to build her studio, and still, she called me a liar, a fraud, a burden live, on camera. My knees nearly buckled. But before I could leave, the wedding MC, a friend I hadn't seen in years, took the mic and said the words that would change everything, and turn her perfect wedding into a disaster. I stood in front of the mirror that morning, tugging at the hem of my turquoise dress. It wasn't new, but it was pressed neatly, and I had stitched the hem myself the night before. At 65, I don't bother much with fashion anymore, but today felt different. It was Chantel's wedding day. My daughter-in-law, polished and admired, was about to marry my son, Deshaun, on the beach at Montego Bay. The whole thing would be live-streamed, cameras, lights, hundreds of people. I told myself I wanted to look decent, but the truth is I wanted her to see me, to see that I belonged there. I slipped a small box into my purse. Inside was a gold chain with a locket. It had taken me months of careful saving to buy. I had tucked in a picture of Deshaun as a chubby little baby, and another of Chantel from the first year she came into our family. My hands shook a little as I closed the box. Maybe, I thought, if she opened this she'd know I was trying. That I wasn't the enemy. It wasn't the first time I had tried. Years ago, Chantel had asked me for $30,000 to help her set up her studio. She said it was for her career, and she promised she'd pay me back. I gave it because that's what mothers do, we give, even when it hurts. She never mentioned it again, and I never asked. Money comes and goes. I told myself it was worth it if it meant my son had peace in his home. The resort was beautiful. White tents lined the sand, and the ocean breeze carried the smell of salt and sunscreen. Guests in glittering gowns and suits posed for photos that would later flood Instagram. I walked slowly, trying to keep my head high, even when I caught the side glances. My dress was traditional, made of patterned island fabric. To me, it meant pride. To them, I suppose it looked outdated. A young woman with a clipboard hurried over. "Excuse me, ma'am. The front rows are reserved." "I know," I said. "I'm the groom's mother." She looked down at her paper, then back at me. "I'm sorry, you're seated at table 12, toward the back." Her tone was polite, but the words cut deep. Table 12. Behind sponsors, influencers, colleagues, people who hadn't raised my son, who hadn't given up nights of sleep so he could chase his dreams. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. "That's fine." From that table, I watched Chantel walk down the aisle. The sunlight bounced off her jeweled gown, and the crowd gasped as if heaven itself had sent her. My hands clutched each other tight in my lap. "Please, God," I whispered, "let today be about love. Let her heart soften just a little." When the vows ended, I wiped at the tears I couldn't stop. For a brief moment, I thought maybe this day could heal the distance that had grown between us. Maybe all the cold silences and sharp looks would fade now that we were truly bound as family. At the reception, the flowers spilled out of crystal vases, and the tables sparkled with glasses of champagne. My seat was at the edge near the catering station, where waiters brushed past carrying trays. I laid the small gift box in front of me, waiting for the right moment to give it. Just a minute at the microphone, that's all I hoped for. A chance to bless them, to say something kind. Nothing grand, just a mother's words. But as the music played and laughter filled the air, I began to see the cracks. Chantel leaned close to her friends, laughing, toasting. She embraced Deshaun's co-workers, called them family, introduced them with pride. Not once did her eyes search for mine. Not once did she walk near my table. I tried to push it away. Told myself, she's busy, it's her big day. I waited, patient, rehearsing what I'd say if given the chance. But the truth pressed harder on my chest with every passing minute. There I was, the mother of the groom, and still I felt like a stranger at my own son's wedding. Still, I didn't give up. I told myself the day wasn't over. Maybe, just maybe, my turn would come. The music from the reception still echoed faintly in my ears when I sat down at table 12 with the other guests. Most of them were strangers, people who smiled politely but didn't know who I was. One man asked if I was a friend of the bride's family. I smiled and said, "I'm the groom's mother." His eyebrows lifted in surprise. I could almost hear the question behind his silence. "Then why are you sitting all the way back here?" I tried to ignore the sting. I focused instead on the glowing lights strung across the palm trees, swaying gently in the breeze. It was a beautiful evening, one that should have filled me with nothing but joy. But beauty can't cover the ache of being left out. As waiters moved past with trays of champagne, I couldn't help noticing how the first tables were always served first, their glasses filled while ours waited. By the time our plates came, the food had cooled. I pushed my fork around the plate, tasting little. My heart was too busy counting the small hurts piling up, one after another. I kept glancing at Chantel. She moved through the crowd like a queen, flawless in her gown, greeting guests with hugs and laughter. She leaned into my son with the kind of smile that photographs adore. Deshawn seemed proud, almost dazzled. I watched him laugh at her jokes, watched him hold her hand as if she were the only person who mattered. I wanted to be happy for him. I truly did. But the more I watched, the more I noticed what was missing. His eyes never searched for mine, his steps never carried him toward me. He moved in her world, not ours. And I sat in the shadows, invisible. I told myself, don't dwell on it. You'll get your moment. Maybe during the speeches, I thought. Maybe someone would hand me the microphone, let me share a blessing, just one sentence to remind everyone that I was here, that I was his mother. The chance never came. When the music softened and it was time for toasts, I leaned forward, hands clasped tightly together. First came Chantel's friends, each one telling funny stories and praising her ambition, her charm, her beauty. Then came Deshawn's colleagues from television, talking about his talent and how lucky he was to marry someone like her. I waited. My heart pounded, my throat dry. But my name was never called. No one invited me forward. Instead, I watched as Chantel raised her glass. She spoke about her chosen family, her circle of friends and business partners who had carried her to success. She thanked them, one by one, eyes sparkling, voice warm, and with each word I felt myself shrinking. When she said, "Family isn't always about blood. Family is about who lifts you higher," the applause was thunderous. But I sat frozen, staring down at my hands. I knew those words weren't meant for me. They were meant to erase me. I shifted my gaze to my son, praying he would glance my way, that he might read the pain in my eyes. He didn't. He clapped along with everyone else, his smile fixed on her. The small cracks in my heart widened. I thought of the nights I had stayed awake when Deshawn was sick as a boy, cooling his forehead with damp cloths. The mornings I worked 2 shifts so he could study without worry. The sacrifices that no one applauded, no one live-streamed. And now, at his wedding, I was little more than a shadow in the corner. I lowered my eyes, pretending to sip from my glass so no one would see the tears welling up. Still, I told myself, hold on, just hold on. The night wasn't over. Maybe she'd remember the gift. Maybe she'd see me, even for a moment. Later, when guests mingled and music filled the air again, I gathered my courage and walked toward Chantel. I held the little box in my hand, my palms damp. "Chantel," I said softly when I reached her side. She turned, her smile wide for the cameras still circling nearby. Then her eyes flicked to me, and the smile thinned. "Oh, hello," she said, her voice colder, quieter. "I just wanted to give you this," I said, holding out the box. My voice trembled. "It's something I thought you might like. For both of you." For a heartbeat, I thought I saw her hesitate, maybe soften, but then her eyes darted toward her friends. She let out a little laugh and said, "Oh, Mrs. Josephine, you didn't have to. Really, we're fine." She didn't take the box. She turned back to her group, and just like that, I was dismissed. I stood there for a second, the box still in my hand, my cheeks burning. Then I turned and walked back to my table, each step heavier than the last. The music roared, people laughed, the cameras flashed, but around me it all felt muffled, distant. Those small cracks that had begun earlier in the evening, they weren't so small anymore. They were spreading, slowly but surely, through every corner of my heart. I sat at the table with the gift box still resting in my lap. My fingers pressed against its edges as if holding it tighter might steady me, but no amount of pressure could keep back the sinking weight inside. The night, which had started with so much hope, now felt like a slow unraveling. The music swelled, and guests rose to dance. The laughter around me rang sharp, as though it belonged to another world. From across the room, I watched Deshawn twirl Chantel on the dance floor. His face glowed with joy, the kind of joy I used to see when he was a boy chasing kites in the yard. Only now, that smile wasn't meant for me. I had never expected to be the center of attention, but I thought, at the very least, I would be treated as though I mattered, as though the years of sacrifice meant something. Instead, I was hidden at the edge, dismissed with polite words, and left holding a gift no one wanted. The betrayal wasn't loud. It wasn't someone shouting at me or pointing a finger. No, it was quieter than that, and somehow more cruel. It was the silence when my son walked past me without stopping. The quick turn of Chantel's head when I tried to catch her eye. The way the wedding planners ushered me toward the background like an extra in someone else's movie. Every little gesture added up until I felt myself shrinking smaller and smaller. When the photographer announced he would be taking family portraits, my heart leapt. Finally, here was my chance. I rose, smoothing down my dress, clutching the box in my hand. But as the group gathered at the front, one of the attendants stopped me. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said gently but firmly. "This round is just for immediate family." My mouth opened, then closed. I wanted to say, "But I am immediate family, I am his mother." But the words caught in my throat, thick and heavy. I stood there frozen as Chantel's parents took their places beside her, as cousins and siblings posed, as Deshawn smiled for the camera, surrounded by everyone but me. In that moment, I realized something painful. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. I wasn't forgotten. I was deliberately left out. I stepped back, my chest burning. I returned to my chair, set the gift box down, and stared at it until the gold ribbon blurred through my tears. It is one thing to be overlooked, it is another to be erased. Later in the evening, I finally caught Deshawn alone for a moment near the drinks table. He looked tired, his tie loosened, his forehead shiny under the lights. I reached out, touching his arm lightly. "Deshawn," I whispered, "can we talk for a second?" He turned, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. But then he forced a smile. "Mom, it's a busy night. We'll talk later, okay?" I swallowed. I wanted to say I'm proud of you, and I had a gift for you both. Before I could finish, Chantel appeared at his side, slipping her arm through his. "Babe, come on, the livestream's waiting," she said, her voice sweet but sharp underneath. Then she glanced at me, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "Enjoy the party, Mrs. Josephine," she added, her smile never reaching her eyes. And just like that, they walked away. I stood there, my hand still half raised, the words still on my tongue. The betrayal settled deeper in my bones, not the betrayal of strangers, but of the very people who should have stood closest to me. When I returned to my seat, the other guests at my table looked away politely. They had seen. Everyone had seen. And still, no one spoke. The hours dragged on. I sat quietly, invisible among the noise. I thought about the $30,000 I had given without question, the nights of prayer I had whispered for Chantel's success, the countless hopes I had held that maybe, one day, she would embrace me as family. Instead, I was treated like an intruder at my own son's wedding. As the evening wound down, I made one last attempt. When the final song played and the guests began gathering their things, I walked up to the edge of the stage where Chantel was thanking everyone for coming. I waited patiently, the gift still in my hand. When there was a small pause, I stepped forward. "Chantel," I said softly, "please just take this. It's from my heart." She glanced at me, then at the cameras still recording. Her voice dropped low enough that only I could hear. "You don't need to pretend, Josephine. We both know you like the drama." Then, with a smile for the crowd, she turned her back on me. I stood there, stunned, the box trembling in my grip. That was the moment the betrayal sealed itself, not with a scream, not with a scene, but with a whisper that told me I would never belong in her world. I returned to my seat one final time, staring out at the ocean beyond the lights. The waves kept rolling in, steady and unbothered. And I sat there, quietly broken, realizing that the cracks I had felt all evening were no longer cracks. They had become a fracture, splitting something inside me that might never be whole again. The night should have been winding down with gentle music, laughter, and warm goodbyes, but for me it was only beginning to unravel. I had already endured the silent rejections, the forced smiles, the way Chantel's words cut just deep enough to bruise without leaving a visible wound. I thought that was the worst of it. I was wrong. It happened so suddenly, I still replay it in my mind. The microphone was in Chantel's hand again. Her voice, smooth and practiced, carried over the speakers, reaching every guest under the glowing tent. She thanked her followers watching live, the sponsors, her friends. And then her tone shifted. "There are people who don't deserve to be here tonight," she said, her eyes locking with mine. The room hushed. My breath caught. Some people bring nothing but negativity. They feed off drama, they pretend to care, but in truth, they only hold us back. Tonight, I want to say clearly I don't want that energy in my marriage or in my life, so if you're here only to play the victim, you can leave. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold despite the Caribbean heat. My hand went instinctively to my chest, clutching the chain of my purse. For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. I wanted to sink into the floor, vanish into the sand beneath the tent. Someone coughed. A murmur spread through the crowd. Phones tilted upward, recording. Chantel didn't blink. "Josephine," she said into the microphone, her voice sharp but steady. "Please, leave." I heard the word please, but it didn't sound like kindness. It was a dagger dressed in silk. The silence that followed was louder than any music. My hands trembled as I placed the little gift box back into my purse. I stood slowly, my legs stiff, my body feeling older than it ever had. 200 people watched, some with pity, some with curiosity, some with judgment. Not one moved to help me. I glanced at my son. For a moment I begged with my eyes, "Say something, do something, protect me." But Deshaun lowered his head, his jaw tight, his hand still clasped in Chantel's. That was the moment my heart cracked wide open. I walked through the crowd, each step heavy, each whisper burning in my ears. Drama, embarrassing, poor thing. The words swirled around me like smoke. By the time I reached the edge of the tent, I could barely breathe. My chest ached, my throat closed, my knees shook. I pushed through the flap of fabric and stepped out into the cool night air. The sound of the ocean rushed over me, drowning out the music behind me. I stumbled toward a bench near the garden and sank down, gripping the wood as if it might anchor me. I had never felt so utterly alone. All the years I had carried my son through sickness, all the money I had poured into helping Chantel build her dream, all the quiet prayers whispered into my pillow, and here I was, discarded like trash. Publicly humiliated, stripped of dignity, left in the shadows. My hands shook so badly I could barely open my purse. I pulled out the little locket, staring at the tiny photos inside, my baby boy's round face, Chantel's smile from years ago when she was new to our family. I pressed the locket to my lips and whispered, "Why? Why did it have to be like this?" Tears spilled down my cheeks. I didn't try to stop them. I let them fall, hot and endless, until my vision blurred. Behind me the music swelled again, as if nothing had happened. People danced, laughed, celebrated. The world went on while I sat there broken. I thought about calling my sister, about walking straight off the resort grounds and never looking back, but my legs felt too weak to move. I stayed there, hunched and trembling, as the night stretched long and merciless. I realized then that loneliness isn't about being physically alone. It's about being surrounded by people who see you and still choose to look away. And in that moment, I knew I had never been more invisible in my life. I don't know how long I sat on that bench outside the tent, my hands gripping my purse as though it might keep me from falling apart completely. The ocean whispered against the shore, and the breeze cooled my tear-streaked cheeks. Inside, the music thundered on, muffled now by the canvas walls. To everyone else, the party was still alive. For me, the night had already ended. I thought I might just slip away. Walk back to my small rented room, pack my bag, and disappear from this glittering world where I had never belonged. No one would notice. No one would follow. My son wouldn't even realize until hours later. But then I heard a voice. "Josephine?" I looked up. Standing before me was a man I hadn't seen in years, Marcus. He had been one of the old neighbors back when Deshaun was little, the kind of man who always waved as he passed our gate, sometimes stopping to chat. Now he stood in a crisp suit, holding a microphone loosely in one hand. He had been the wedding MC. I quickly wiped my face. "Marcus, I didn't know you were here." He gave me a sad smile. "I almost wish I wasn't, after what I just saw." He sat down beside me, his shoulders heavy. "I'm sorry, Josephine. That wasn't right. None of it." I opened my mouth, then closed it. The words tangled in my throat. For the first time that evening, I felt the burn of shame loosen just slightly, not because the hurt had vanished, but because someone had finally acknowledged it. "I shouldn't have come," I whispered. "I thought maybe this would be the day she saw me, but I was wrong. There's some things given tops." Marcus shook his head. "No, you had every right to be there. You're the groom's mother. Without you, there wouldn't even be a Deshaun to marry her." He let out a long breath, rubbing his forehead. "Do you know what I almost did? I almost put the microphone down right then and there. I almost walked out. I turned to him surprised. He nodded. I've hosted a lot of events. I've seen pride, drama, family fights, but I've never seen a bride humiliate her mother-in-law on stage like that. It was cruel, and it was public. Something inside me softened. Just hearing someone else name it, call it what it was, felt like a lifeline. For the first time all night, I didn't feel like I was imagining things or exaggerating my pain. I thought I was invisible, I murmured. Marcus shook his head again. No, Josephine. Everyone saw. And believe me, people will remember. This isn't the kind of thing the internet forgets. He glanced toward the glowing tent. The cameras were on her, sure, but they were on you too. And people noticed the dignity you carried when you stood up and walked out. Not many could do that. I let out a shaky laugh. Dignity? I felt like I was falling apart. That's the thing, Marcus said softly. Sometimes strength doesn't feel like strength in the moment. It feels like survival. But from the outside, people see it. They see more than you think. For a moment, we sat in silence, listening to the waves. The weight on my chest didn't vanish, but it shifted. Instead of crushing me, it sat beside me, lighter because someone else was willing to carry a piece of it. Before he left, Marcus placed his hand gently on mine. You're not alone, Josephine. Don't let her make you believe that. After he walked back inside, I stayed on the bench, staring out at the dark water. The pain still throbbed, but a small spark flickered where only despair had lived before. Someone had seen me. Someone had spoken up, even if only in private. It wasn't much. But it was something. And sometimes, in the deepest darkness, even the smallest light feels like a miracle. I went back to my little room that night, long after the music had faded into the sea air. My turquoise dress still clung with the scent of salt, but inside I felt hollow. I placed the small gift box on the table, unopened, useless now. It looked out of place in the dim light, like a reminder of everything I had hoped for and lost in a single evening. I tried to lie down, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again. Josephine, please, leave. It was the please that hurt most, not gentle, not caring, but sharp, like a knife wrapped in ribbon. So I sat by the window instead, staring at the dark waves. That was when I heard voices in the hall. At first I thought it was just other guests heading back to their rooms, but then I recognized the tone. Chantel, and my son. You embarrassed me, she snapped, standing there with that little box. Do you know how pathetic that looked on camera? My chest tightened. Deshawn's voice came back, soft, almost pleading. She's my mother, Chantel. Maybe you didn't have to. Didn't have to? She laughed, but it was bitter. She's been hanging over us for years, always looking for sympathy. Do you want me to remind you who paid for tonight? Who made your career respectable? Not her, me. I pressed my hand over my mouth. My own son stood silent as she shredded me with words. Then her voice dropped lower, but I still caught it. And that 30,000 she gave me? She thought money would buy her way into my life. Well, it didn't. And she's not getting it back. I felt my heart lurch. I had never once asked for it back. Never. The hall went quiet, and then she spoke again. Keep her in the background, Deshawn. That's where she belongs. In my world, image is everything. And she ruins the picture. Their footsteps moved away. I stayed frozen in my chair, trembling so hard I could hear the rattle in my teeth. This wasn't just being unwanted anymore. It was the truth staring me in the face, cruel and undeniable. She had never seen me as family, not once. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the wall. Eventually, I reached into my purse, looking for a tissue, and felt a piece of paper crumpled at the bottom. I pulled it out, thinking it was nothing, but when I smoothed it flat, my stomach dropped. It was a financial document, stamped with the logo of a Kingston firm. My name was on it, not as a guest, not as family, but as a guarantor. My signature from years ago, when I had once co-signed a small loan, had been reused, this time for a much larger amount. My throat went dry. If she defaulted, it would all fall on me. The humiliation of tonight suddenly made sense in a harsher light. It wasn't just pride or dislike. She wanted me erased so no one would believe me, so no one would ask why my name was tied to her debts. I set the paper down slowly, my tears dripping onto the ink. For the first time in years, everything was clear. Chantel's charm, her polished words, the way she built her empire, it wasn't built on love or hard work alone. It was built on people like me. People too willing to trust, too quiet to fight back. And my son, my boy, who once ran barefoot on warm sand, who used to cling to my skirts when he was afraid, he stood silent while she turned me into a villain. I whispered to the empty room, "So this is who you are," and I didn't want to see it. Outside, the waves kept rolling, steady and endless. I sat there until my tears dried, staring at that piece of paper, feeling both broken and strangely awake. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing: I would never again beg for a place in her picture. The morning after the wedding, I rose before the Sunday. I hadn't slept much, but something inside me had shifted. The shame from the night before still clung to my skin, but beneath it was a new kind of resolve. Quiet, steady, like a seed pushing through hard soil. I folded the turquoise dress carefully and placed it at the bottom of my suitcase. It wasn't the dress's fault. It had carried me through humiliation, yes, but also through truth. When I touched the fabric, I didn't just feel pain. I felt a reminder that I had stood tall, even when the world wanted me small. I left the resort before most guests stirred. The streets of Montego Bay were still half asleep, the vendors just beginning to set out fruit and bread. I walked slowly, breathing in the morning air. For the first time in a long while, I felt invisible in a way that was comforting. No cameras, no whispers, no spotlight, just me and the quiet. When I reached my little rented room in town, I spread the financial document across the table. My hands traced the lines of my forged signature. For years, I had trusted blindly. Now I saw how that trust had been twisted. But instead of crumbling, I felt something else rise in me. I whispered aloud, "No more." That afternoon, I went to the bank. My heart pounded as I stepped through the glass doors, clutching the paper. At 65, bureaucracy still made me nervous, but I reminded myself, this is my life on the line. The clerk listened patiently as I explained, her brows knitting together when she saw the signature. She promised to investigate. It wasn't a full answer, but it was the first step toward reclaiming my name. It felt small, but it was action, and action felt like breath. Over the next days, I moved quietly. I went to the market and bought simple food: rice, beans, fresh fish. I cooked for myself again, something I hadn't done in weeks while preparing for the wedding. The smell of garlic and thyme filled the little room, and for a moment, I felt at home. I also started writing. At night, when sleep refused me, I pulled out an old notebook and let my pen move. I wrote about the wedding, about the humiliation, about the truth I had overheard. But I also wrote about my childhood, about the strength of the women who raised me, about the way they endured storms and still found ways to laugh. Each word was like a stitch, sewing my spirit back together. Marcus visited once. He brought a bag of mangoes and sat across from me. "People are talking," he said gently. "What happened at that wedding?" It didn't sit right with a lot of folks. I looked at him, unsure whether to believe it. They all watched. None of them said a word. "Cheese in her little grated flexed." He nodded. "Not then, but silence doesn't always mean agreement. Sometimes it just means people are afraid. Give it time." I didn't know if he was right, but I held on to his words. They were lighter than despair, and I needed anything that felt light. I began walking each morning, down to the shoreline. The sea has always been my teacher. It reminded me that life keeps moving, wave after wave, whether we feel ready or not. I let the water touch my toes, cool and steady, and whispered small prayers. Not prayers for them to love me, not anymore, but prayers for strength, for dignity, for a heart that could still hope for something beyond this pain. It wasn't a grand transformation. I didn't suddenly feel healed, but each day, I made choices small, steady choices that belonged to me. I stopped checking my phone for messages from Deshaun. I knew they wouldn't come, and waiting only hurt me more. Instead, I wrote letters I never sent, pouring out my love for him, reminding myself that even if he forgot, I never would. I looked at the little locket still sitting on my nightstand. I thought of throwing it away, but I couldn't. Instead, I placed it gently in a drawer. Not gone, just set aside like a memory that still mattered, even if it was too painful to touch right now. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I lit a candle by the window. My mother used to say a candle was a way of telling God you hadn't given up hope yet. The flame flickered, fragile but steady, just like me. And in that moment I realized I didn't need to fight loudly. I didn't need to scream my worth into the world. My strength could be quiet. It could be in the meals I cooked for myself, the prayers I whispered, the papers I filed at the bank, the words I wrote by lamplight. I had been humiliated, betrayed, and erased. But I was still here. And as long as I was still here, I could rise. Not with noise, not with spectacle, but with the steady, silent determination of a woman who refused to be broken. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways, but when it finally came, it was quiet. No crowd, no cameras, no bright lights, just a wooden veranda in the late afternoon, the sea stretching endless beyond the palms. Chantel stood before me, arms crossed, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She looked smaller without the wedding gown, without the stage, but her eyes still burned with the same sharpness. Deshawn lingered behind her, unsure, shifting from one foot to the other. I had invited them both, not out of hope for reconciliation, but because I had carried the weight of silence too long, and silence was no longer my home. "Why now?" Chantel asked, her tone clipped. "What's the point of dragging this out? The wedding is over. You've already made enough of a scene." And said it. I didn't answer right away. I let the breeze fill the space between us, carrying the scent of salt and hibiscus. I wanted my words to be steady, not rushed. "I'm not here to make a scene," I finally said, my voice low but firm. "I'm here to tell the truth. Not for you, not for Deshawn, not even for those who watched it all online. For me." Chantel gave a short laugh, as if she thought I was still playing the role she had written for me, the bitter, needy mother-in-law, but I didn't flinch. "I gave you $30,000, I continued, meeting her gaze. "Not because I wanted to control you, not because I needed to buy love. I gave it because that's what I've always done, sacrifice for family. For years I thought if I gave enough, worked enough, endured enough, then love would come back to me. But I see now. I was wrong." Her jaw tightened. Deshawn looked at me, then at her, but said nothing. I leaned forward, my hands resting on the rail. The money never mattered. What mattered was the way you used it, the way you used me. You smiled in front of others, called me mom when it suited the image, but behind closed doors, I was nothing but a nuisance, someone you mocked. I heard it with my own ears. Her cheeks flushed, but she stayed silent. "I found the papers too," I added, my voice softening but not breaking. "My name tied to debts I never agreed to. Do you know what that means for a woman my age? It means if you walk away, I carry it. Alone. After all, I've already carried." Chantel finally snapped. "You think you're the victim? You think standing here accusing me makes you noble? You signed those papers. No one forced you. You wanted to be needed. Well, congratulations you were." Her words stung, but for the first time, they didn't cut me down. They revealed her more than they shamed me. I straightened, meeting her head on. "You're right about one thing. I did want to be needed. I thought being needed was the same as being loved. But it isn't. Love doesn't demand silence. Love doesn't use someone's kindness as currency. And love doesn't kick a woman out of her own son's wedding for the sake of a perfect picture." Deshawn shifted, his lips parting as if to speak, but I held up a hand. "This isn't for you to fix, son. This is mine." My voice grew stronger, like the tide finding its rhythm. "I'm not asking you to apologize, Chantel. I don't need your forgiveness, and I'm not begging for your approval anymore. I came here to put the truth where it belongs, out in the open. You don't get to define me. Not anymore." For the first time, she looked unsure. Her eyes darted away, as though the mask she wore was slipping. "You can keep the money," I said quietly. "Consider it my last gift, not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to let debt, financial or emotional, tie me to you anymore. You owe me nothing, and I owe you nothing." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting match. Chantel opened her mouth, closed it again, and finally turned away, muttering something I couldn't hear. She walked down the veranda steps and disappeared into the garden. Deshawn lingered, his eyes full of things he couldn't say. "Mama," he whispered. I touched his arm gently. "Don't. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about me remembering who I am." That the capity won with greeted out the disagrees. For a long moment, he just stood there, and then he followed her path, leaving me alone with the sound of the waves. I exhaled, a long, shaky breath, and for the first time in years, I felt light. Not healed, not whole, not yet, but free. The day after that conversation on the veranda, I woke with the strange feeling that the world had shifted just slightly, not for everyone, but for me. My chest still ached from the words I had spoken, but it was not the sharp ache of humiliation anymore. It was the deep soreness of a wound that had finally been cleaned. For the first time in months, maybe years, I let myself rise without rushing. I made a cup of coffee the way I liked it, strong, with just a touch of sweetened milk, and sat on the porch of the guest house where I was staying. The morning sun painted the sea gold, and for once, I didn't feel the urge to rehearse conversations in my head or brace for another blow. The quiet was my company, and in that quiet, I felt the faint stirrings of something I thought I had lost forever: peace. I started walking each morning along the shore. At first it was just to fill the empty hours, but slowly it became something more. The rhythm of the waves taught me how to breathe again, steady and unforced. I would pick up shells, small and ordinary, but they reminded me that even the broken ones still had beauty. One morning, I found myself humming as I walked. It startled me, the sound of my own voice carrying over the surf. It had been years since I had hummed without realizing it, years since music had risen in me uninvited. Back at the guest house, I began writing in an old notebook I carried. Not letters to anyone this time, but simple reflections. What I saw, how I felt, memories that surfaced like driftwood. I wasn't writing for answers. I was writing to hear myself again. I didn't cut all ties overnight. Deshaun called once, his voice hesitant, testing the waters. "Mama, are you okay?" he asked. I smiled faintly at the phone in my hand. "I'm not broken," I told him. "I'm resting. There's a difference." It wasn't the reassurance he wanted, but it was the truth. And for the first time, I didn't rush to soften it. Chantel never called. That silence used to haunt me, but now it became a kind of freedom. The less space her voice occupied in my head, the more room there was for my own. Little by little, I built new rhythms. I joined a small group at the local church, not out of duty but for the warmth of human presence. We weren't grand people, we shared potluck meals, we traded recipes, we prayed for each other's aching knees and stubborn grandchildren. But sitting at those long wooden tables, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. One woman, Miss Clara, noticed my silence at first. "You don't talk much, do you?" she teased one evening. I smiled. "I used to talk plenty, but I've learned sometimes the quiet says more." She patted my hand. "Well, your quiet feels good, like sitting near the sea." It was the simplest compliment, but it stayed with me. Maybe silence wasn't emptiness after all. Maybe it was space where something new could grow. I began tending to a small garden patch behind the guest house. Just herbs at first: basil, thyme, a bit of mint. Watching green shoots push through dark soil stirred something in me, the reminder that growth is stubborn, that life insists even in small corners. Each evening, I sat outside with my tea, listening to the cicadas. I thought of the life I had given away to please others, the years spent waiting for a word of gratitude that never came. There was grief in those thoughts, yes, but also a strange, steady pride, because I had endured. And now, I was still here. One afternoon, I walked past the resort where the wedding had taken place. From the road, I could hear the faint echoes of music, another couple celebrating under white tents and fairy lights. For a moment, my chest tightened, but then I kept walking, the sound fading behind me. Their joy was theirs, my journey was mine. I didn't envy them anymore. I didn't even resent them. I simply let them go, like the tide letting go of foam. In stillness, I began to see myself not as a woman discarded, but as a woman transformed. The silence was not punishment, it was a cocoon. And slowly, in the quiet hours of mornings and the soft light of evenings, I felt myself unfurl. I was no longer the woman who begged for a seat at a wedding table. I was the woman who walked barefoot on warm sand, collected shells, grew herbs in stubborn soil, and filled notebooks with her truth. I was my own witness now, and that was enough. There comes a moment, after the storm has passed, when silence begins to speak louder than all the chaos. That was what I felt as I sat on the porch one evening, notebook in my lap, pages crowded with thoughts and memories. The sea lay calm, almost mirror-like, and when I caught my reflection in the glass of the window, I paused. The woman staring back at me was lined with age, her hair streaked with silver, yet her eyes carried something new. For the first time in years, I did not see only loss, I saw survival. Looking back no longer made me tremble. In the past, every memory of Chantel's cutting words and every scene from the wedding would play on repeat in my mind until I felt sick with shame. Now, when those images surfaced, they no longer hollowed me out. They were painful, yes, but the sharpness had dulled. I could hold them without crumbling. It felt almost like touching a scar instead of a wound. I whispered into the quiet, "I let her define me for too long." The words floated into the air and seemed to disappear into the sound of the waves, and I knew they were true. For years I had shaped myself around the role of the unwanted mother-in-law, the woman who gave and gave, while receiving little more than scraps in return. But when life stripped me bare, I realized I had always been more than that role. I had simply forgotten how to see it. One afternoon I lingered before a mirror longer than I had in years. I traced the silver in my hair and the lines etched deep around my eyes. Once I would have powdered those lines, tried to soften the truth, but this time I saw them differently. They were not marks of fading youth but a map of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every trial endured. My reflection was no longer something to hide from, it was a testimony. For so long I had prayed that someone, anyone, my son, my daughter-in-law, even strangers, might notice my worth. But as I stood there, I realized I didn't need to wait anymore. I saw it myself, clear as daylight, and that was enough. The quiet days taught me lessons I had never learned in all my years of noise and struggle. Solitude, which once felt like punishment, became a companion. I discovered that I could eat a meal without waiting for company, walk without rehearsing conversations in my mind, and sit by the shore without filling the silence with words. I used to fear being alone, but I learned that loneliness is not the absence of others, it is the absence of self. And I had finally returned to myself. Grace often arrived in small, ordinary moments. The neighbor's little girl brought me a hibiscus flower, her small hand shy as she pressed it into mine. The church group asked me to lead a prayer one evening, their voices warm as they echoed Amen. And one night, I drank tea steeped with mint. I had grown myself. It was nothing extraordinary, just a small taste of life fresh and alive. Yet in those moments, I felt something healing inside me. I began asking myself questions I had not dared to ask before. One evening I wrote in my notebook, "What do I want now?" For decades the answers had always belonged to someone else, my husband before he died, my son as he grew, my daughter-in-law when she demanded her perfect image, but now the answer was mine alone. I wanted peace. Not the fragile kind that comes from keeping quiet to avoid anger, but the stronger kind that grows from knowing you can face pain and still remain standing. When I closed the notebook, I smiled faintly. I wasn't writing to be heard anymore. I was writing because I was listening to myself. In time, I came to see that reflection itself was not a burden. It was a gift. It revealed how far I had come. It reminded me that the story of my life did not end in humiliation at a wedding. That was only a chapter, not the ending. The truth was simple. I was still here, and I was the author of what came next. That evening, I leaned back in my chair on the porch, the sea breeze cool against my face. My heart, once so heavy with grief and shame, now beat steady with acceptance. Not acceptance of mistreatment, but acceptance of myself. In that quiet stillness, I understood something I had long forgotten. This was my rebirth. The sun was low on the horizon when I decided to return to the little patch of garden I had started months earlier. The mint and basil had grown taller than I expected, their green leaves carrying the scent of resilience. I stood there with the soil still warm under my fingers and thought of everything I had survived. The betrayal, the humiliation, the silence that once felt like a punishment. It had all brought me to this moment, standing quietly in front of something I had nurtured into life. I had been asked by the church group to share a few words at the Sunday gathering. The request surprised me. For years I had been silent, a woman in the background, her voice swallowed by stronger ones. Now, people actually wanted to hear me. I wasn't sure what to say at first, but when the day came, I carried with me a small clay pot with a young hibiscus I had planted from a cutting. The hall was simple, filled with neighbors and familiar faces, each one waiting with kind eyes. I placed the plant on the table before me. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I spoke. "This little hibiscus," I said, "was nothing but a thin stem weeks ago. People might have thrown it aside. It looked fragile, maybe even hopeless. But I planted it anyway. I gave it water, sunlight, and patience, and now, here it stands." I looked around at the faces, some nodding slowly, others leaning forward. We're not so different from this plant. Life may cut us down, humiliate us, try to throw us away, but with time and care, we can grow again. We can bloom again. I know this because I am still here, standing before you. The room was silent, but not heavy. It was the silence of people who were moved, who understood without needing more words. When the gathering ended, several women came forward to touch the hibiscus, smiling through tears. One whispered, "That's our story too." And in that moment, I realized the symbol was no longer mine alone, it belonged to all of us. Later that evening, I carried the pot back home, setting it on the windowsill where the light could find it. As I poured water into the soil, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle into me. Not pride exactly, but something softer, something like closure. For years, I had measured my worth by how much others needed me. I thought love meant sacrifice without limit, but life had taught me differently. Love without respect is not love at all. Giving without boundaries is not kindness, it is erasure. I had been erased for too long, and I refused to let that be my ending. Now, each leaf on that hibiscus reminded me of the truth I had claimed for myself. I was not powerless. I was not disposable. I was a woman who had walked through fire and come out still whole, still alive, still capable of planting something new. Deshaun visited a few days later. He looked at the hibiscus and smiled softly. "Mama, that's beautiful," he said. "It is," I replied, touching one of the leaves gently. "It's a reminder." "Of what?" he asked. "That we don't have to stay broken," I said. "We can always choose to grow again." He nodded, though his eyes carried the weight of things unspoken. I didn't press him. I didn't need to. The words were more for me than for him. That night, I sat by the window as the moonlight touched the hibiscus. I thought of the girl I once was, the young mother struggling to provide, the woman who poured herself out until she was nearly empty. I thought of the wedding, of the eyes staring as I was told to leave, of the shame that once felt unbearable. And then I thought of this moment, the quiet, the plant, the peace in my own chest. It struck me then that survival is not loud. It doesn't need applause or headlines. Survival is quiet, steady, and persistent. It is a plant pushing through soil. It is a voice trembling but still speaking. It is a woman choosing to live on her own terms at last. I closed my notebook with a gentle hand. The pages inside told the story of my journey, each one carrying pieces of pain and fragments of healing. But I no longer needed to reread them. The story lived in me now, and I was no longer afraid of it. When I finally went to bed, the night air cool and clean, I carried with me the image of that hibiscus in bloom. A small, simple plant, yet a symbol of everything I had become. I had been cut down, humiliated, dismissed, but like that flower, I had risen again. And that, I knew, was the true ending I had been searching for. The hibiscus had begun to bloom. Its petals, a deep red against the green, opened wide as if to greet the morning Sunday. Each time I passed the windowsill, I paused to look at it. It was no longer just a plant to me. It was a reminder, a living witness to the journey I had walked, the betrayal, the silence, the quiet rising. One afternoon the church invited me to bring the hibiscus to the women's circle. I hesitated at first. It felt so personal, almost private, like showing them a piece of my soul. But something told me that symbols are meant to be shared, not hidden. So I wrapped the pot carefully and carried it to the hall. We sat in a circle, women of different ages, each with her own story of loss, disappointment, or survival. I placed the hibiscus in the middle. Its bloom seemed almost too bold for that simple room, but somehow it belonged there. "This flower," I said, my voice steady, "was once only a stem. Someone might have tossed it away. But with care, it rooted, it grew, and now it blooms. I keep it because it reminds me that no matter how cut down we feel, life has a way of rising again." A younger woman, maybe in her 30s, wiped her eyes. "That's me," she whispered. "I feel like that stem right now." Another, older than me, nodded slowly. "We all do, child, at one point or another." Industry. As they spoke, I realized the symbol had moved beyond me. It was no longer just about my journey. It had become a mirror for theirs. The hibiscus was us. All of us, blooming after being cut down. In the weeks that followed, the hibiscus became a small tradition. Women brought cuttings from their own gardens, and together we planted a row behind the church. Every week, more blossoms appeared, red and pink, some pale yellow. A garden of survival, a garden of testimony. I often sat there in the afternoons, watching the flowers sway in the wind. Children ran between them, laughter filling the air. One day, the little girl who once brought me a single hibiscus flower skipped up to me. She touched one of the blossoms and said, "These are your flowers, Miss Josephine." I smiled and shook my head. "No, sweetheart. These are our flowers. Thanks for watching." There was something deeply healing in knowing that my pain had not ended in bitterness, but had bloomed into something others could hold on to. I had thought my story was just mine, a burden I carried alone. But by letting it into the open, it had become a seed, growing in ways I could not have imagined. At home, I began keeping not just one notebook but several, one for my reflections, one for prayers, and one where I wrote down the stories of the women who shared their lives with me. Their courage, their sorrows, their small triumphs, they deserve to be remembered. Sometimes I wondered if, one day, someone might read these pages and see in them not just our struggles but also our strength. Deshaun visited again, this time sitting with me in the garden behind the church. He looked at the rows of hibiscus blooming in all directions. "Mama," he said softly, "you turned something awful into something beautiful." I rested my hand on his. "That's what life asks of us, son. To take what tried to break us and turn it into something that feeds others." He nodded, his eyes damp, though he tried to hide it. For once there was no talk of fixing, no apologies forced, just presence. And that was enough. As the sun dipped low, the flowers seemed to glow in the fading light. I thought of the woman I used to be, the one who begged silently for a place at someone else's table. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone new, a woman who built her own table and then invited others to sit. I touched one of the blossoms gently. Its petals were soft, fragile even, but it had pushed through soil, wind, and rain to stand tall, just like me. The finality of my journey did not feel like an ending but a beginning. The hibiscus, with its bold bloom, had become more than a plant, more than a symbol. It was a living promise that no matter how deep the wound, no matter how sharp the betrayal, life always carries the possibility of blooming again. And as long as I lived, I would carry that truth. Not as a wound, not as a burden, but as a gift. As I sit here now, watching the hibiscus in full bloom, I understand something I never did before. Life is not measured by the moments when others applaud you or accept you. It is measured by the courage you find when no one is watching, when you stand alone and still choose to rise. For too long, I believed that my worth depended on being needed, on giving without limits, on earning a place at someone else's table. But I know now, my worth was never theirs to give. It was mine to claim. I lost much along the way: respect, family, the dream of belonging in my son's new life. Yet what I gained is something deeper. I gained myself back. And in that return, I discovered that healing is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, steady, like a flower pushing through the soil. It is learning to breathe again after years of holding your breath. It is forgiving yourself for all the times you stayed silent when you should have spoken. The truth is, no betrayal, no rejection, no cruel word can erase the value of a life lived with love and endurance. We are stronger than the roles others try to force upon us. And sometimes the greatest act of love is not clinging to those who wound us, but setting ourselves free. So if you are listening, if you have ever been pushed aside, silenced, or made to feel small by the very people you love the most, I want you to know this. Your story is not over. You can still bloom. You can still rise. And now, I want to ask you, because your voice matters here. Have you ever been betrayed or dismissed by someone you trusted? And how did you find the strength to stand up again? Share your story in the comments. Maybe your words will be the light someone else needs tonight.